Fletcher. Now sit back and prepare to be entertained. Welcome to the Dripping Bucket Podcast.
Greetings and welcome back to the Dripping Bucket Podcast with your hosts, Krystle J. Matar and Michael W. Fletcher. Wait,
I thought that's
Clayton Snyder today.
Clayton W. Snyder.
I'm not Fletcher today. I'm somebody else.
No.
It's fine. I'd rather
You've
be
never
him
been-
anyways. So tall.
I don't think there's been a single episode on the Dripping Bucket where you've been Fletcher. So
Really? No.
yeah,
That's-
I think you've
It's a shame.
changed your name.
Never
every
been
single
myself.
Time. Not for this program.
No. So today we are here to share with you, the tentative listener, golden nuggets of writing wisdom.
Shit.
Tarnished turds.
Total bullshit that we're pulling out of our asses last minute because we're not professional here.
Yeah, this is a last minute throwing it together. We're going to talk about short stories today.
Short
Krystle is a self-proclaimed master short story writer. So Krystle, start us off. What are you thinking? What's your approach? How do you start?
Usually I start with a lot of convincing myself that I have no good ideas, which is how I start books too. So like it's good. It's the same across all. And I was just thinking, like, I have 2 shortish in the anthologies, and I have 1 flash fiction published that was 300 words, which is possibly the hardest thing I've ever done. And I say that as somebody whose last novel is over 300,000 words, and still, My Poppy Fields Are Burning was still the hardest thing I've ever done. So yeah, I start short stories by agonizing a lot about how much I suck at writing short stories. And then eventually, something happens and I have a story at the end of it. And I think I black out because of all the pain.
Which should explain, earlier we were talking about,
we've
got the short story in the Unavowed anthology, and
you can't
I don't remember
the
writing it. I can't remember anything about it. I have no idea. But the title is cool, Lord of Vengeance. That sounds like something I might write.
That'll be interesting, like when it comes back to you, assuming they're going to run an edit or something on it. Like,
Lord, I hope so.
When it comes back to you for your edits, if you still don't remember it. Yeah, well, and it would be interesting, because does that actually give you a super objective view of the short story, because you don't remember doing it at all? So it's like, oh yeah, that's a good sentence. I really like that. I pulled something off pretty cool there. Yeah. I
think that is the best way to sort of read your own stuff, is, once you've completely forgotten it, which is actually scary, because I'm, drinking less these days, which means my memory is in theory improving. Like this was written back during, the heavy drinking days.
Oh, okay. That was my question.
So will that mean I'm a shittier self-editor now that I can actually remember writing them?
Well, do you actually remember your progress day to day? Like, what are you working on right now? Could you summarize what you've done in the last 2-3 weeks?
Yeah, I've been like hyper focused. So I've been working on the horror novel. So I remember everything. I've got like the entire book in my head right now.
Yeah, that's different. Okay, well, what did you work on before that? Do you remember that? I guess. But that
no, I was drinking then.
Yeah. Okay. So this is going to be a long-term test that occasionally pops up on this podcast as I randomly.
Is Michael a better writer or a shittier writer when sober?
When he's sober. But you don't write, like, you write during the day, so you're not drinking yet. Right?
Yeah,
like
I never drink and write at the same time, or drink and edit. I just can't.
Yeah.
I know I am envious of people who can, because that sounds awesome. But I can't do it. I
usually
tried,
like,
and it was terrible.
Yeah, same for me. Like, usually if I just go for it, like, I'm feeling great, I'm gonna go write something, and I open it up the next day and I'm just like, yeah, that sure is 2 hours of my life that I can't get back. I could have been doing something fun while I was drunk. delete. So So yeah, that's not one of my skills.
No.
So
all right,
yeah,
let's take a hard left turn back onto topic.
Sure.
Quick, before we run out of time.
This is why we don't bother coming up with topics, because we don't stay on them. So
no, we don't. So
okay.
Do you start your short stories with an idea how it's going to end? Like, are you writing to sort of tell a story, or are you writing more for an effect or to achieve a sort of a denouement?
So the two in anthologies, no. I start with the theme that was given to me by the anthology. So Alchemy of Sorrow, the theme was going to be grief. We didn't even have the title when we were churning out our stories, and so it was just like expressing grief in science fiction and fantasy. And so the first story that I wrote for that was too long, surprising absolutely nobody, and I set it aside. And actually, that's what I'm working on now, is the novel version of that story.
That's how long the short story was.
No. I set it aside for so long, and now it's just, I don't know, it's eating my brain, because I like it. I think it could be a really cool Western now that I've had some time to like. So that's my history with short stories. I set them aside and turn them into novels later. But yeah, what I ended up with was a story about Ishmael. And as to the question of if I know the ending, the answer is absolutely not, because the first draft of that I wrote, it was about him like up in the mountains of his home with his mother, who was dying, and she wanted to be buried on like the ancestral land. And so that was supposed to be the story. And then he said something about his, this watch that he inherited from his father being garbage and junk, and it might as well be a paperweight, and he would go home and fix it in some spiteful fit of brattiness. And then so I was like, oh, well, I guess I have to close off that thought at the end of this story. And I wrote, like 500 some odd words of him going home and grappling with this watch. And my first reader, shout out to Levi, who's also in the anthology, read the whole thing, bless his heart, and then he came back to me very, very timidly. It's like, so what kind of feedback are you looking for? Like, are you looking for...
You gotta love it when they start with that.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, do you want honest feedback, or should I be nice? You're like,
do you want like line editing feedback, or are you open to some big changes? I was like, yeah, hit me with the big changes. I'm open to anything, so long, as I think I could make the story better. And he was like, actually, that last scene is the most compelling part of this whole story. And what would you think about trashing literally everything else and just focusing the story on that one moment? Just because, we kind of know what's happening up in the mountains, because we know his mother's dying. We know he's going to bury her. So there's no tension through that part. But that last scene where he's grappling with this watch that's broken, and then he makes bad choices, surprising no one who knows Ishmael, is a story. So I took that last tiny little scene that was absolutely an afterthought, that I didn't even know I was going to write when I set out to write the story, and that is now a 9,000 word story in Alchemy of Sorrow.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, so all of that is to say, no, I have absolutely no idea what the fuck I'm doing at any stage of this. But that's not a bad thing to me, because I wouldn't have thought of that. I wouldn't have thought of that story at all if I had approached it from like a really linear, this is what I'm going to do. And it was just the one line he said about, the paperweight watch. And I was like, oh, that's a good idea. That could be something. And then the willingness to throw out something like 8,000 words and then write 8,000 new words instead. I'm actually really pleased with the way that story came out. So all of that is to say, I'm willing to change literally anything if it makes a better story.
Yep. So. Yeah, I'm the same with stories and books.
Yeah.
Which kind of brings me to what I would call probably my first piece of short story advice. It's the same with books, but with short stories, I think it matters more. And it kind of, I think, goes to what you're saying, which is start after shit has blown up.
Yeah.
It's a short story. You don't have time to lead up, like, here is his normal life and here he is going through his day before things go wrong, and let's take some time to meet his parents. It's like, no. Shit blew up. Your story is already started. The people are already in the fire. You know?
Yeah, and I think for the difference between a short story and a novel in that case is maybe in a novel I would have taken that first idea and made it like the first chapter or the first little bit. But the short story, we do not have that luxury of budget. So we throw the words out. We throw the words in the garbage. We call it project development or prototypes or something. And then we write something good instead. So it was a good lesson, I think, for me in like learning to omit things, which is a hard learned lesson.
Yeah. I tend to start with a very vague idea of what the story is going to be, and either a theme or a feeling I want to hit by the end. And sometimes it's as simple as like that anthologies. It's grief.
Yeah.
Sometimes I will start out and I'm like, I want the reader to cry, to feel sadness. I want them to feel some pain over this. And then, that's the challenge kind of, which I think might be the way I approach short stories, is they're always a challenge because they're so fucking difficult.
They're so hard.
I start with something that's like already insanely difficult to write, like grief. Like, holy fuck. Like writing grief. Like, could you pick a more difficult emotion to sort of really capture?
It is hard because like the slide into syrupy melodrama is a very steep slope, like 1 foot off and you're like way down into this pit of self-loathing. And it's like, yeah, I mean that sure is things that people think, but also that doesn't necessarily make a good story, especially if you have only a small budget to wrap up to some kind of resolution. So grief was a hard one to start with.
Yeah. And so have you written anything like actually short, like sort of 4,000 word kind of length?
Yes, but it's not placed anywhere. I did back in 2020 maybe, Grimdark magazine was doing like an open short story call, and I wrote for that, so I think it was a 4,000 word cutoff. But then the the story that I wrote, I actually removed the character from Brightwash, and so the story could no longer technically take place in my own timeline. So I was like, well, that was fun. But I think about it a lot because I think it had one of my best titles, and the concept was pretty rough because they're butchering a deer that Ishmael shot and having a conversation about life and death and stuff, and it was like it was pretty visceral. I liked it, but the other character doesn't.
And it stood on its own as a short story, like without having read any of the books?
Good question. I think so.
Yeah.
There was I seem to remember I had Clayton read it. And so he said it read like a vignette, so it's just like just a moment. And there was like a couple of lines that he thought could be taken out because it was too spoilery for Brightwash, but otherwise it was good. And he was repulsed by it, which was like, yeah, score. I repulsed Clayton.
It takes some doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious. So, like, you've never just sort of submitted short stories to magazines just because you love, self-flagellation?
Not in recent skill levels. I probably did back before I came back to fantasy. Like, I still have some rejection letters from back in the day of the self-addressed stamped envelope.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't keep any of mine, but I had a lot.
Yeah, I kept them because I wanted, like, the progression. And then one day I would have an acceptance. And then I self-published, so there goes that idea.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't think I've tried to place any since I've decided to self-publish, because I think it's just such a different road that I let go of the idea that I needed any door in, which is kind of what they tell you at least back
that's what I believed. Like, when I started writing short stories and sending them out to magazines in 2009.
Yeah.
Which was, back then, a lot of them would not accept emailed submissions because they were terrified of viruses and stuff. So it was all like
self-addressed.
Self-addressed stamped envelopes, and you get that little tiny sheet of paper that basically just said no. I remember the first personalized rejection letter. That felt like a fairly major achievement.
Yeah, I bet it must have been like, I'm
making progress.
And then nothing. And then Beyond Redemption.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. 2011. After, I remember tracking it on a submission grinder, over 100 rejections.
Oh, wow. Ouch.
I sold my first short story.
Oh, okay.
And then, actually, I think I sold 2 that year. And then, it was Beyond Redemption, and I sold in 2013.
You sold short stories before you sold Beyond Redemption. That's interesting.
No one cared. No one cared. No one gave a shit. The editor wasn't like, oh, he sold short stories, I'll check this out.
Yeah.
No one gave a shit.
Yeah. I remember that being advice back in the day, where it's like, if you place some short stories in various publications and it looks good on your query letter or your cover letter or whatever. But now that I'm in the business, I feel like that's such strange advice to give to people, because that does not seem to be true at all. And maybe at one point it was true, but it was certainly before my publishing days.
These days, my advice is always like, if you want to write short stories, cool, go ahead.
Do it, yeah.
If you want to be a novelist, write fucking novels.
Yeah. Yep. Because they're different skills. And it sounds strange, because in theory it is the same act of sitting and writing a fiction story, especially if you're in the same genre, but it is a different set of skills. In a really weird and hard to define way, because
you've got so little space to like introduce a character and make the reader give a shit about them. Give them, you got to cram the world in there without info dumping. If you've got magic, you need to get that in there. You've got to set everything up and then come to like a really sort of powerful conclusion that says something, all within 4,000 words. It's like
short stories and novellas seem to be the realm of the less conclusive ending, where like they're more, I notice a lot more open-ended small stories, because I think it's more like it's less of a story and more of like a what if thought, where you don't have to track the internal logic of it the same way you have to do with a novel. Like, an idea that could fit into a short story and be really good sometimes couldn't ever be a novel, because once you write it out into a larger scope and it has to have internal consistency, all of a sudden this idea begins to fall apart because none of it actually makes sense. But you can get away with that in short stories and novellas in a way that's weirdly satisfying to read, because it's just like, I didn't need to know how this worked. It just happened. It was great.
Yeah, I think there's probably an art to. We get so many ideas. Like, you have more ideas than you're ever going to have time to write. But then you have to sort of sort through them and go, this one goes in the garbage pile. This one goes in the short story pile. Yeah. This one I have to turn into a book, so it'll leave me the fuck alone. Yeah. And it's tricky because some of the short story ideas where, like, it's good enough to be a short story and you're like, oh, this could be a novel. This
could be something.
Until you start writing and you're like, nah, it's not a novel. I don't have enough. I don't actually have a novel. I have a fucking short story that's now bloated and useless.
Maybe I should try more short stories just to get through that, like, backlog of, God, wouldn't it be nice if I had time to write this thing and that thing and the other thing? But what do you do with short stories? You
send them out to magazines. I mean, you can self-publish them. Like, I've got that collection of short stories, but most of those were previously published by various magazines.
Oh, you have like a collection, like
yeah. Because I've
paperback and all that.
Yep.
Oh, okay. Hang on.
There's a dozen or so stories in there.
Okay.
I can't remember.
Does anybody buy it?
Oh, fuck no. But I mean, when they were originally published, they're all like pro, or there were a couple of semi-pro sales. So it was like a couple of $100 each time, which back then was like nice,
impressive.
I mean, making anything from
so
writing
much
was
whiskey
insane.
with that.
Yeah, like in 2011. Not now.
Wow. Yeah, you buy a lot of whiskey with a couple $100 in 2011. That's like a whole case of the crappy stuff you drink.
But I think you send them out, and what's fun is you can fall as much in love with one of your short stories as you can with one of your novels. You care just as much, and then you send it out, and if you're lucky, it gets picked up by a magazine, and then they publish it, and then no one gives a fuck.
Yeah,
because no one reads short stories, and you're like, wow, that story I really, really cared about just bloop.
That makes such a good case for me trying to write them more often. Thanks. Thanks for
you should totally do
that bullet. All right. I care too much about attention to be able to survive something like that. Like, I think I would like, the structure of my being would slowly implode if ever I published something that didn't get attention.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can relate.
That's why you're so sunny and cheerful these days, right?
Alrighty, so we're I don't know, 23 minutes into this. Do we actually have any advice? Anything else? What are you thinking?
I think it's good to try it. I think it's good to do a couple and like get some feedback on them, because you do learn a lot about yourself as a writer as you try to beat that fucking thing into like decent legible order. And I think it's a good skill to have, but I do think it's a different skill than writing a novel. So if it doesn't interest you at all, you don't have to. But also, I do think you can learn a lot about what kind of stories you want to tell if you can churn out a couple short ones and get some feedback on them and find out how much of it you're willing to change to make it good.
It does force you to be a little leaner with the prose, and to sort of like put more thought into individual words, as like you got $100,000 word novel. You're not necessarily sort of like stressing over every single word, going, "Do I need this word?" What some people are. You are.
Yeah, I do, because when you get up into 200,000 words, people start accusing you of being bloated or whatever, and so you actually kind of double down on that stress and be like, does this book actually have to be this long? And then you read it so many times and realize you don't know what you would take out. And then part of your soul dies and you pay an obscene editing bill. So yeah. I think both ends of that spectrum makes you stress out about the exact choice of words.
Yeah, I totally lost my train of thought.
Oh, sorry. It makes you stress out more about your word choice.
Oh, yeah.
That's what you're saying.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I find I my prose gets a bit better in a short story, hopefully, because I'm more focused on like, how do I get this across with impact in a short space, rather than like, a long character arc and having time to set things up and then, landing with impact. It's like, you get there faster.
It has to be prompt, but that in a way that kind of makes, I find it makes the prose a little bit more poetic, because you have to say so much with so little. And they're really good short stories kind of take me a long time to read, because I have to like digest what's been said, rather than, a couple of pages in a novel that I'm trying to get through into the plot. Like, hurry up, this inciting incident. Short story is all inciting incident, and then a tiny amount of payoff, and then it's over, and you have to recover from it a little bit.
Yeah. Writing them requires recovery as well.
Yeah, that too. That too. Okay,
Alrighty.
I guess that just
let's
about,
wrap it here.
Yeah.
Thank you once again for joining us, folks. Like,
about
subscribe, all that bullshit.
Yeah.
And we'll see you again next week.
Go follow our Twitter account. Which is
we have Twitter now.
We do, but by the time this airs, like, it'll be old news. So if you haven't followed it by the time this airs, then we have beef officially, people. Okay, we're gonna sign off, and thanks for coming.